If you ask an AI to analyze a text objectively, it adopts the persona of the universal reader. It strips away personal bias and evaluates the work based on pure logic and standard aesthetics. But if we dig a little deeper, who exactly is that default reader supposed to be? We tend to think of skills like reading comprehension, logical deduction, and aesthetic judgment as completely neutral. A good argument is a good argument, and a great story is universally great. But for centuries, that universal perspective hasn't been universal at all. The supposedly objective standard we use to measure art, literature, and logic has always carried a very specific, built-in bias. In 1949, the philosopher Simone de Beauvoir pointed out exactly how this works. She argued that in our culture, humanity is male. She described a system where masculine experience acts as an absolute vertical, the singular baseline against which every other human experience is measured and judged. Because the masculine perspective is treated as the default, the feminine perspective is treated as an anomaly. It is defined only in relation to that center, rather than as something independent. This setup strips away female autonomy. Instead of being an equal subject in the world, a woman is compelled to assume the status of what de Beauvoir calls the other. So when we praise a piece of literature for capturing the universal human condition, we are usually just applying a male-centered baseline. How did this skewed baseline actually become our cultural operating system? Literary critic Annette Kolodny pointed out our historical canon didn't naturally assemble itself. The standard of what makes a text important was carefully constructed by a very specific demographic. When we learn how to read and analyze literature in school, we aren't just absorbing words on a page. We are being programmed with specific interpretive paradigms, taught to value certain stories over others. This selective filtering creates a canon validating male power and significance, while blocking out everything else. Historically, male writers preempted the language of literature. Because they controlled the canon, their specific experiences were automatically categorized as profound. Virginia Woolf noticed the effect this had on readers. She observed that a male critic reading a woman's work will often abandon it, writing off her perspective as weak or sentimental, simply because it relies on values that differ from his own. Battles, political summits, and grand adventures were treated as serious literature, but actions unfolding in the parlor, the nursery, or the kitchen were systematically dismissed by the establishment as insignificant. Simone de Beauvoir warned that society makes it remarkably easy to accept this marginalized role. She noted that women sometimes accept the status of the other because it offers a path of complicity. Carving out your own authentic identity takes an enormous amount of mental and social effort. Conforming to the roles already laid out by the dominant culture is a much easier road. These standards persist because an entire society has been meticulously trained to evaluate truth, art, and importance through a masculine lens. Now that we know the universal standard is a myth, how do we evaluate anything fairly? Simply reversing the roles to make women the new absolute standard would replace one biased hierarchy with another. De Beauvoir argued that the first step is to stop looking at society as a static, unchangeable fact. It is bad faith, she wrote, to treat the verb to be as permanent, rather than understanding it dynamically as a state we have become. If the current hierarchy is just something we have become over time, it means we possess the power to become something entirely new. Annette Kolodny called the mindset required for this new society a playful pluralism. Rather than forcing every idea through a single dominant filter, a playfully pluralistic approach responds to multiple methods and perspectives without being held captive by any of them. But achieving this requires active work. Kolodny notes that we have to deactivate the minefield, which means dismantling the deeply rooted fear of sharing cultural power and significance with women. Unlearning the myth of the default human goes deeper than a simple syllabus update. It allows both sexes to exist not as subject and other, but as fully, autonomously human.